Go ahead. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Megan Hoyer. I'm the Director of Public Programs and Public Engagement here at the Whitney. And it's my great pleasure and really an honor to introduce this afternoon's program in conjunction with David Wojnarowicz, History Keeps Me Awake at Night, the brilliant, necessary, and all too timely exhibition upstairs on the 5th floor. Hopefully you have all had a chance to see the show, or will following the program. We're open till 10 p.m. And then I hope you will also be coming back again and again to see Wojnarowicz's work while it's here in this amazing constellation. And the show closes September 30th, and we have lots more programming to come. I'll stop promoting now. So just to make sure we are all on the same page, today's program has two parts. The first part is a conversation between Marion Scemama and Sylvère Lotringer, moderated by my colleague David Breslin, DeMartini family curator and director of the Whitney's collection, and co-curator with another dear colleague, David Keel, of the Wojnarowicz exhibition. And the second part is the New York premiere of Marion's film, Self-Portrait in 23 Rounds, a chapter in David Wojnarowicz's life, 1989 to 1991. We'll take a brief break in between and start the film at 4:30, just so that you know what you're in for. But it's all good. So don't go anywhere. So these two events are related through their relationship to a 4-hour interview that Sylvère conducted with David in the spring of 1989. Not only did Marion arrange their meeting, she also videotaped that conversation. And that document is central to both parts of this program. For the conversation today, Marion has chosen 3 excerpts of the exchange that go to the heart of Sylvère and David's interview then, and also I think help us to see and understand David's work and project more lucidly in the present. And then the film also includes footage, but very different footage from that document as well. So I'm going to introduce our 2 speakers and then turn things over to David. Marion Scemama is a French photographer and filmmaker. She and Wojnarowicz met in 1983 when she was on assignment to shoot him for the magazine Ici New York. Hope that's right. That I found online. And they became close friends. They collaborated on multiple works in a variety of formats, often combining her photography with Wojnarowicz's imagery. They were also frequently the subjects of one another's cameras. Sylvère Lotringer is a philosopher. As general editor of Semiotext, Lotringer was instrumental in introducing French theory to the United States, including the work of Paul Virilio, Jean Baudrillard, and Michel Foucault. He is the author of so many things that it's kind of hard to choose, and maybe it's foolish, but the author of Antonin Artaud and has published on Georges Bataille, Simone Weil, Céline, Marguerite Duras, and Robert Antelme. I don't really know how to say that, sorry. He's also published extensively on art. He now lives in LA and I hear is just writing constantly, but we didn't talk about exactly what projects to mention, so I'll let him choose to clue you in if he so desires. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Marion Scemama, Sylvère Lotringer, and David Breslin.
So I'm pretty much up on the stage so that I could free up one seat in the audience because this was such a popular and oversubscribed event. But I really want to thank the two of you for coming here, for all the work that you've done to make the Wojnarowicz exhibition that we have upstairs possible. And I want to thank you by way of a little bit of an anecdote from me. When this book came out, in 2006. I was in grad school. I was living in New York. My brother, who's an artist, and I just devoured it constantly. We read it, reread it, and thought about this as this interesting model because it really read like a play. There's something really haunting about the way narrative and chronology unfolds. There's a start, but there's then another start. There's an end, and there's another end. There's theory, there's personality, there's love, there's anger, there's so many things in it. And we were so moved by it that we hatched this plan to actually perform it as a dialogue, guiding so far as to have Christian Zatrex at the Emily Harvey Foundation say that he would do it. I reach out to Sylvère for his permission, which he actually gives, and then I said, this is crazy. I'm not an actor. This is a 4-hour thing. I don't want to pretend to be David Wojnarowicz or Sylvère Lotringer. But I did want to incorporate this text almost into my body. I wanted to read it, to have it be a part of my thinking and being. And so by way of this book, and Marion, by way of your film, which I think are two amazing complementary bodies of work, we now have more to refer to in thinking about the work of David Wojnarowicz. So before we go to the first clip, I wonder if you could just maybe briefly set up how this interview even came to be.
Should I start? Sure. Okay. So I have been living in New York from 1981 to 1986. And I met David in 1983, and we were friends, and then after less friends, and I came back to Paris. And in 88, I met David really by chance in the street. He was coming back from Madrid, and that's where he told me that he was depressed, that Peter Uja had died, and that he was staying at his loft, not working anymore, like just staying in the bed, and he was really depressed. And I thought that, because this guy gave me so much when I was in New York, he opened doors so much for me and for a lot of other people. I thought that I had to do something for him because I could feel how depressed he was. And I thought, okay, now we met really by chance in the street, so something's meant that I have to do something for him. And so I proposed to him, we spent a week in Paris, like the great times, like before we used to be. And so I decided to come for the summer in 1988 and help him to go back to work and to spend time with him and enjoy again being back together. And so when I came back, we really had great time. Like right away we start reworking together, setting things together. And then I thought that I should support every one of his needs in terms of working, creating, doing things. And so he had this show at PPOW that was coming up, and he asked me to come several times in New York to help him, to support him, to exchange ideas with him. And then while we were putting all the show together, we thought that he should have a catalog for this, because it was a very, very strong show and very strong paintings, very strong photography. And it was new, he was coming on the scene, on the art scene after a long while of silence. So I said, well, yeah, we should have a catalog, but by that time, PPOW couldn't have a catalog. So I said, look, let's do a Xerox's catalog, then it doesn't matter. It's just let's give somebody to people so they can bring it back home, look at your work and, understand something about your work. And it was really great because it's the first time that David Wood allowed himself to write about every painting that was in the show, every photo piece that was in the show. So we had this Xerox's catalog, and then I said maybe you would like somebody to write about it, and we spoke about Felix Guattari I was friend with. And so we had this text in this Xerox catalog. We had this text about Felix Guattari. And then in just a little bit after this show, I was in New York again in May '89, and David was complaining to me that intellectual didn't care about his work. The only thing that journalists would do is to have this storytelling about himself, like he was a beaten child and living in the street and hustling and all this very romantic but destroyed life. But no one, no critic or no intellectual would look at his work and criticize his work. So I know David, and I know that somewhere he was saying, yeah, you could help me maybe, you know, to do something about that. And I could feel it. And then, of course, I was very close to Sylvère, who always supported me in my work, in my relationship with David. That wasn't always easy. And so I thought, well, the intellectual in New York, it's Sylvère. And he made so many interviews, and very strong interviews and important interviews of the art scene with performers, painters, actors. And so I went to him, I called him, I said, would you like to make an interview with David? And he said, of course, I'm very interested. So I put them in contact, and then I had this video camera David asked me to come with from Paris. And so I decided to shoot the interview. And we end up with talking 5 hours, a little bit more than 5 hours, where I was filming. And now we had this incredible documentation about that moment. And this was in May 18, 1989. So it took us years to do something from this interview. Sylvère was the first one. He transcribed the interview and published it in this book with semiotext. So the interview is there. And it took me like more than 20 years to finish the film. Even more, yes, maybe 29 years to finish the film. And, you know, I did it through the years, sometimes without doing anything, other time, because, you know, it was kind of emotional also to have David always in front of me talking with his voice. And so sometimes I had to stop working on that. And then the Whitney, and I have to thank the Whitney, because the Whitney invited me to show this film. And from them I got grants to finish the film, and really I thank the Whitney, because this film would be not finished yet, you know. So thank you very much to David Keel and to David Breslin for that.
Well, we're thrilled we have it, and maybe that's a good transition to the first portion of the film that we'll watch right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I feel a little intimidated, but mostly because I've always felt intimidated by intellectuals, and my experience with intellectuals has always been that they use language as like a hammer, and that's been my experience in the past. And I've always
sometimes you need hammers too. No?
True, but not when you're the one who's getting the hammer on your head. So I've always been attracted to people with information, or people, you know, intellectuals, and to the ideas of language maybe describing something further and further away from what's physical. But at the same time, either due to lack of education or self-education, I never learned the thing of construction of language in that way. And I seem to be feeling things about language or about definition a lot more in looking at mortality, or looking at the possibility of my own death in the near future, and or at least the fear of it in the near future. And
But you're using language about yourself.
yeah, I do, but I think it's to name something or to touch something that, I mean, there's a number of things that happen when I use language. Like if I sit down and write, it's another voice. And it's a voice I usually don't use in conversation. It's words I rarely use in conversation. And part of it, I think, came from when I was younger, reading. When I was like 7 or 8, I remember reading books that were maybe 4 school grades ahead. Reading novels. I mean, anything I could touch, I would read. And I think the language made an impression, even though I didn't understand some of the words, that it stayed in. It's like in a memory store that when I would sit down to write at a typewriter, words would come out that I wouldn't understand their meaning, but later if I looked it up in a dictionary, it fit the context of the sentence. So it was like always this other voice that was much more fluid, much more maybe romantic or whatever. And I guess writing through a typewriter, talking to a machine, through your fingers, removes what I've always felt about people, about my contact with people, communication with people, which suppresses whatever language I have through fear, or through alienation, or whatever, or through fear of judgment. So going through a machine or a typewriter, it opens the gates of language, and I'm not intimidated.
Well, what I read from you is very intellectual. That in the sense that it's like when academics say, "Oh, this is academic." Well, we say, "Oh, this is intellectual." But I'm saying intelligence. Intelligence has no concepts, and that's what makes the thought be powerful. By intelligence, I mean something that's kind of zooms on the situation, the intelligence of of reflecting, being detached and reflecting on what is actually happening, not intellectually, but with intelligence. I mean, that's what theory, etc. should be too. Sometimes that's fun. So I'm getting some help from people who have another approach to the same kind of phenomenon that puzzle us. And you connect and you don't connect, but they like tools too, because your tool is intelligence, and their tool is intelligence too. There's no.
I guess it's a construction of language that, or what's always bothered me about certain intellectuals is the use of language to isolate themselves from others,
Yeah.
and to put distance between themselves and others, and that basically. Only a lawyer can understand a lawyer.
Well, it's a long project that started when I arrived in New York in 1972. I didn't know much about. I didn't know much about American or New York art. I was French. The French don't teach this kind of thing. So I was on my own. So I started talking to artists and looking for artists who could tell me more about it. And the first reaction I had from an artist was exactly the same as David's, rejection, fear, intimidation, etc. I remember having lunch with an artist, and he got so angry, taking it personally, that he didn't understand every word that I was saying, right? So he got up and left. And I thought, well, I won't last very long here, because if everyone reacts to my talk like that. So I thought maybe what I could do at least is to change my kind of way of talking. And I thought I would just renounce my concept, but keep the idea of it, right? And actually, it started also very early that I talked to. I was told that if I want to see someone in my quest, it's like a quest. I decided that I was. I didn't understand exactly what the art world was, what the art were, and And I have to, if you can go directly, you have to go through different ways. And I decided to not to talk the American way or to the artists do, but to talk ask them to talk for me. So I asked them questions. So questions are more neutral, if you want, less threatening, right? And at the same time, it allowed me to in the answers that they gave me, I retranslated into French conceptual language what I was listening in American. So that's why it was a long enterprise. But at least I immediately recognized the kind of reaction in number of artists I made. So they stopped doing it when I became much more open to what the culture was and not what I assumed it was. And so the idea that was maybe what can I do? The excuse I had to meet artists was that I was making interviews. And in fact, I ended up making a lot of interviews, more than I ever expected. But through this excuse, if you want, I mean, in as much as I wanted to understand America, and in other words, let me just. I came to New York, and I realized that New York was an incredible place. You know, it's a place in the 70s. It was a place that was totally dilapidated, and you know everything about New York. But at the same time, everything was possible. You could change your identity. You have see, it was a creation. You didn't have to be an artist to create. You know, the art and creation and art and life, daily life was part of the same continuum. Right? So I decided again that I was going to multiply these interviews, and that became my mark, if you want. You know, whenever I go and I want to understand, to connect to people, then I had this perfect excuse to take my tape recorder. One of those was Jack Smith, with the first one whom I met when I arrived in New York. I was told, oh, if you want to hear about New York art, you just go and see Jack Smith. And I went to see him, and he said, I mean, it's an interview that has been published since, and the only one with Jack Smith, actually. Very often I create documents because no one was interested in talking to them. They were talking between themselves. So I tried to immerse myself. And Jack Smith was a perfect introduction. After a while he said, look, you know, it is not language, it is thought. When you think, you can imagine and you can create things. But language is only peripheral. Forget about language. So that was the answer to David Wojnarowicz and the apprehension. And that went on. I tried to understand where this kind of strange tribe, because it was really a tribe at the time in New York, the tribe of New York artists. And now there may be 200,000 artists in New York. At the time, there was like about I don't know, I would say 120 of them at most, totally isolated from the rest of the world in a sense, and only up to themselves. So this tribe, for me, was just a certain way of opening so many doors and opening my mind. I asked them to talk for me about things that they were saying, very conceptual things without knowing that they were. So what I try to do is to be el hombre invisible, the invisible man, the one who is there, like here to be a mediator and to create another culture besides this one. So I tried to see also where they're coming from, and I went to see galleries, and galleries say, no, we're not interested, we don't buy things. You know? I say, well, but it's not painting, right? So, the assumption was that they were waiting for painting to return in order to begin to activate and to create the art world. The art world was non-existent. There was like maybe 5, 6 galleries. It was a very, very intimate setup. And so I realized that when the art started, right, in a sense, it was something that was conceptual, minimal, and galleries were not interested at all, right? And what happened over the years is that I'm trying to go to the root of it, to the origin of it, and it would never happen if the Italian and the German neo-expressionists wasn't coming to America. Again, what they did was, of course, it's always a complex. Every situation is very complex. But the situation was that the German and Italian, and Italy were pretty much flush with money at the time, and New York was totally in pieces. So they mounted a big machine to conquer New York. And actually, if you read the reaction of the critics at the time, they felt very much under threat, and they reacted in a very racist way. You know, they didn't want the scepter of the art world of art in New York to be taken by the barbarians. Right? So that what was interesting in that is the fact that the neo-expressionists were reintroducing painting as a canvas, and they ended up not winning the war, but something else happened. They inoculated New York with neo-expressionism, and that jumped, if you want, in the East Village, right? And the East Village was meant of people who didn't have much of an experience of art and what is and painting was. They were mostly coming from art schools. Immediately coming, same New York, and they basically use art to paint in a cartoonish way. It was not really dense or meditated. It was basically consuming canvases, right?
So can I ask you one question on that point? Not to interrupt you, but what was it about Wojnarowicz's work in particular that you found interesting or different? Obviously, you have a relationship with Marion, so the friendship helped bridge certain connections. But when you saw the work, what made you interested in investing your time and years of time in this book to rethink what that work is, or why you wanted to situate it at that moment?
Because he was an intellectual. So
I think that's why I choose this part, because David was resisting, oh, intellectuals, I'm not an intellectual, but it's not true, and Sylvère picked it up very well. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, Sylvère introduced all the French philosophers in American culture, like Virilio, like Baudrillard, like Foucault, Deleuze, Guattari. And in fact, when he say that he doesn't read book or stuff like that, I just would like to mention, for example, in Cynthia's Carr book, Ben Neil mentioned that when they were working on Ipso Formo, the performance for the kitchen, they would meet every morning and have coffee and discuss the work. And they were talking about Virilio and the idea of speed in this culture. And
in fact, what I realized is that the French language and the American art was in continuum. The more they know, the more they would know about art, the more they would know about themselves. But it was not something that was foreign. It is strange when you use the metaphor of the hammer, because all these theorists are philosophers in a Nietzschean way. And when they use a hammer, it's Nietzsche's image, they use a hammer to destroy the building that already have dead, right? So it's a hammer that makes room for the future, and that's what philosophy was. The French philosophy I was interested was not the history of philosophy. It was philosophers who were totally connected to the world in the present, to what was happening now, about predicting it, about analyzing how it works, and each on a different way, crisscrossing each other, right? And it was. I realized that there had been no art in France for the last 20 years to speak of. But the art of the French was the French artists didn't disappear, they just had migrated to philosophy. The philosophy I was trying to introduce was not a philosophy that was intimidating. It was a kind of philosophy who, in spite of sometimes the barbarism of some concept that you have to unfold, it was already American in advance. Mm-hmm. And my work was already half done. I just had to make in contact these two. And then something would happen. And yes, when I talked to Ben Neil, he told me that they came every day with a pure war. It was in 1983. In 83, Semiotex published Pure War, on a line by Deleuze and Guattari, and Baudrillard. Right? And each Ideon way worked like a virus and infiltrated the culture. And that's exactly what I expected, that the specificity of each are going to mesh, right? Yeah. So that was my relation to the art world and my relation to French theory is just one and same thing, and has been for the last 20, 30 years.
Fantastic.
Except one thing, that what happened along the way is that people took philosophy as a prestige mechanism, that they started defining it by the fact that they were difficult to read, right? So they prided themselves to read something difficult. So the reappropriation of theory by America and by the art world was very fast. And at that time, I stopped reading French theory to experience it.
Well, the next clip that we're about to watch is really something that looks at Wojnarowicz's relationship to ACT UP and activism. And I think it would be interesting, after we watch that, to talk a little bit about maybe why he's trying to make these distinctions between information and some kind of intelligence and some kind of intellectual material, because I think that information question is really keyed up by what we'll see next.
No, but something I wanted to say about ACT UP that occurred to me. It's like that I think on some level, the most interesting thing that they have is information, which isn't that easy to get. And that's the best thing about them, is the information that they carry. and what they carry to people and what they're trying to get out to people. Because, you know, one of the things that if you look at heterosexuals and the idea of safe sex, it's like you know, homosexuals basically invented the idea of safe sex.
No, but there's something else about that capital, like the fact that they do exactly the way you think, the way you do in a sense, you know. I mean, AIDS is a way of expression, right? And they do that at best. I mean, of course, it's an organization, they think, but they kind of made AIDS something that opened up to the world. So that, I mean, they told me a story where they found themselves, you know, besieging the vice president of Chemical Bank, right? And finally being admitted there, and the guy turns around and said, "But I thought you were dealing with AIDS. I mean, what are you doing here?"
That's right. They were trying to get them to divest.
Divest from South Africa. Well, I think that's what you do too. I mean, you have a certain perception, and then everything that flies around, you kind of put it together to make it fit, right? And I think what they do at best is that, you know, in order to understand AIDS, death, you know, what's happening to the culture, they have to like play around with all these existing laws, because that's what the action is. You know, you play with the laws of perception, you know, of propriety, of repeating, taking things away and framing it. They frame it too. It's like some sort of, you know, invention in politics of a perception of beyond the level of death. Yeah. See, the nice thing that they found about them is that lots of them are, you know, pretty experts, you know, in advertisement and all these things. I mean, that's where they're coming from, fashion, advertisement, all that. And what they put into politics was a bit what I found in Italians, in a sense of inventivity, you know, just staging things, playing with the media, making sure you catch the attention.
Yeah, I mean, they're media revolutionaries.
Yes,
I mean, that's
yes.
what
Well, I mean, that's another way of, you know, creating a vision that people are going to...
And it makes the most sense, because it's a media that people, I mean, that's where people learn, and that's where they get ideas, and that's where they get all this information. And it's, you know, popular culture, as much as it's kicked around, is really one of the most important expressions
It's always, I mean,
in the culture.
yeah. I mean, when you have people who make a revolution, they really find it unbearable to go on the way it was before, right? And I think in this respect, there's something very unbearable, and that can turn people into another kind of revolutionary. We can always hope to have, like, you know, it's like artworks always hint at something, politics always hints at something too. But you have an idea what you're doing that you kind of contribute to that, I mean, your own ways?
And act up,
No,
or in
I've
terms
seen that.
and acting.
Acting up yourself. Is that what, I mean, do you feel through art that you connect really to this kind of issue that they confront in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, you know, in my readings and stuff, I know I'll enter a room full of people that would rather, the most of which would probably rather not even think about the virus. And if I read a confrontational text about the virus or express my rage, I know I'm kicking around some things in people's heads. I mean, I know what it is. I know what it is, you know, before I got diagnosed, what I didn't want to look at, what I did look at. And I know with a tendency is, you know, it's oppressive to look at things that change you beyond, you know, your own decisions. I mean, things, you know, or your own leanings. It's like to have to change is, to be forced to change is oppressive in a certain way. And people would rather not give up the right to change when they feel like changing. So that, and yet this is a situation where it is a matter of life and death, and that people are dying constantly around this population, and it's easier, you know, it's just easy for people to shield themselves. And so, like standing in a room and screaming about wanting to kill because of the rage I feel, how I see this virus is manipulated by media, by whatever. It makes people a little bit more aware, or at least they see my rage, or at least, you know, I feel calm afterwards because I've screamed for a few minutes. Or
the terrible thing that the virus seems to confirm, I mean, it makes also visible everything that existed before. It just whips it up and makes the gesture to cover up more obscene.
there was the idea at the time that yes, we were talking about he was talking about the Italian autonomists, who was a revolutionary group that happened in the late 70s. And I learned a lot from them. You know, it was, they had a language also, which was the language of the media. You know, for the most interesting one, to be a terrorist and to kill people is not exactly creative. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people who were trying to change the world in the present, like the philosophers I was talking about. And I was struck that the ACTA didn't use the intelligence precisely that the Italians have shown towards the predicament, the political predicament. What do we mean? For instance, instead of kidnapping the president or killing a major bureaucrat, etc., they decided they were going to use the media. What do? In the city of Bologna, which was very circular, they just used a special key to turn to red all the traffic lights in the city, right? Instead of building walls, as some people do, right? You just you make sure that walls are everywhere, but the walls are invisible, right? It's invisible for the better and for the worst. And if they are visible, then it's like the other German wall, you know. You just make sure that it falls. Right? And I did that with the German issue of going through the wall by exchanging the East, the West, etc. Playing. Philosophy is a game, but you have to know what to do when you do the game, because it's easier to accept things than create them differently. Now I have other things that I would say about the loner, the American loner. Right? This is an entity. A loner, it takes a whole society to create a loner. Right? Mm-hmm. But it is a creation of society. You know, in American society especially, everyone has to kind of socialize. If you don't socialize, then the neighbors are going to look at you in a strange way. And if you happen to commit a crime, precisely because you are alone, then they say, well, it's obvious. He didn't have any friends. He didn't communicate, right? So I think very often Americans didn't realize, and being a stranger and a foreigner, I was free to think that there is such a thing as the American loner, the one who cannot express himself, the one who is isolated but has very pressing thing to say to society, right? Mm-hmm. And instead of saying it like the Italian or the German way or the French way, they just jump on the tower and they start killing indiscriminately. In Europe, we used to do things differently. We try to give people an outlet. They are political organization. They are way out. You know, a way out that people can take rather than killing indiscriminately around. And this is, of course, what's happening here now. Even young people in schools have no other way of addressing the culture than offering themselves in some sort of barbarous ritual. Right? So that told me something about the individual. Paradoxically, because I was fascinated by American culture, mind you, I was not trying to put it down, but the loner is in some way, or should be seen in some way as the fulfillment of American culture. The American culture is all about the individual. The more individuals you are, the more integrated, the better, right? Mm-hmm. But in fact, the only one, the primer American individual is a loner. He's a loner because he's totally self-sufficient. But his loner has been mass-produced. Yeah? So we are in a society of mind-produced individuals ourselves, and of course it's at the level of the last stage of despair and of incapacity of coming up with something, and they didn't have a language for it. The language of society essentially wasn't providing a language, tools, and an outlook and a possibility, a future, to those who find it unbearable. They find it unbearable to be more than an individual. Mm-hmm. This kind of reflection could be done. Actually, when I arrived in New York, I was so fascinated by New York that although I teach French literature, I gave classes on sex and death. Mm-hmm. And I went around town, around the city, trying to find how is death treated in this country. And it's not treated. It is not treated at all. Mm. We live here in a culture where death doesn't exist. That's exactly what David was saying too. Death doesn't exist because people repress it all the time, mm-hmm. right? And what you have, what I was suggesting for ACT UP is that it's not only at the time of ACT UP that people have to think about death, but it's every day. Every minute, any second. That's why I was interested in people like Artaud. Artaud was living life as if he was just dead. You know, people should be a bit more dead in order to be alive. That was the idea. But it is a crucial problem for American culture. I think it's a culture that which had to integrate and assimilate population coming from other places and did it kind of successfully compared to what's happening in Europe right now, right? But you have to realize that to express yourself as a first person is not sometimes the best thing to do it. Mm-hmm. You know? And also to repress, to prop yourself from one, but to put your death out of the conversation is exactly the foundation of American culture. Mm-hmm. It's founded on the repression of death, and that's why it is so important for American to have people also who show what's happening. You know what it is about. Because in Europe you have like a generation, centuries of codes and bashing on people's head, etc. Mm-hmm. There is a long history in France of the relation to death, right? But in America there is no relation to death. Mm. And then I thought the first thing I had to do was to discover where death is. And then I discovered, of course, ACT UP. But I went to see artists who deal with death. I went to see people at the morgue. I really wanted to understand in a kind of deeper way what was happening in the culture in order to belong to it.
Yes. Thank you, Sylvère. Marion, I wanted to ask you a bit about being in that room. And I think the one thing that just watching this portion, that very real-looking fake gun on the desk that Wojnarowicz has, this idea of kind of death being in the room almost seems emblematized by that as well. But that decision at one point to change the camera perspective, so you're looking at Sylvère, what you don't get in the transcript of the interview are the pauses and the discomfort and the idea of kind of taking a question in, or in some ways not comprehending what one wants an answer to be or what's expected from you. And I really saw that in that kind of transition of the camera, so that Sylvère is there as much as a performer, a maker of this conversation, than as just the one who delivers the question for Wojnarowicz to answer. So can you speak to that at all? And that,
you mean about the movie?
Yeah.
The way I treated the movie?
Yeah.
Well, at the beginning, after we did the interview, we had two projects for this, working on this interview. It took years to talk about it, but for me, well, there was a semiotext that thought, especially Hedi El-Kodi, who wanted to keep the conversation the way it was, you know, like a conversation between an artist and a philosopher, and, you know, just let it go the way it is transcribed in the book. And it would have been a 3 hours film, 4 hours film, you know, something that takes time to install, you know, complicity or a conversation, or and I thought the idea was great. But then I thought that the film would be more, you know, to show in universities or to teachers or, you know, or searchers. And I thought it was great that it exists that way. But for me also there was this idea that David was speaking about a lot of things. And that Sylvère helped him to say what he had to say at that instant T of his life. And I wanted to concentrate on David's words. Mm-hmm. So I had to choose, you know, I had 4 hours rushes, and I wanted to make it in a documentary that could be seen by a lot of people and easily in a room. So I thought it cannot be a film more than 1 hour or 1 hour and a half. Mm-hmm. So I had to find a structure for that, you know, like it was very difficult to edit the film in a chronological way. It was difficult also, you know, like when you had different themes, how you're gonna put the themes together, etc. So the idea came of the structure of the film, of this title from David's novel, Self-Portrait in 23 Rounds. And I thought that would be great if this film could have 23 rounds, Self-Portrait of David, and this would be help me not to be in the chronological way, but more of, you will see at the beginning of the film, David is relaxed, you know, talking about his work, talking about his love of animals, talking about making things, you know, art, and about the sex areas, about the PPOW show. And little by little, you know, he started like talking about confronting death, what he was facing at this point of his life. And then you feel that his voice is changing, and a kind of tension, and that he's thinking all at the same time that he speaks, he thinks, but you can feel that he already thought about these issues. Mm. And by the end of the film, you know, the tension is stronger. So I like the idea of having 23 chapters. The film is based on the 23 chapters. Of course, you will see I didn't put chapter 1, chapter 2, you know, it would have been too heavy. We had the idea, I have to talk about François Pin, the co-director of the film, and also the editor that did really a great job and great work, and with imagination and love for David too. And so the film has really the 23 chapter, but you will have the feeling that maybe there's 7 or 8 or 9 chapters. So some chapters are named and other not. They're just sub-chapters. And then at the end we had like an hour and 15 minutes movie, but it allowed me to put videos that we did together, David and me, and it was very important also to show how the work is made. So you will see in the film that you have the making of when I put my hands on your body, and then the film itself. Mm-hmm. And for example, also for inside this house, there's a short making of, and then the poem, and then the photo, because I wanted to show what is it for David to make things, really, you know, and from that, from the idea, from the concept, he could make a video, he could make a photo, he could make a painting, you know, so I wanted to show also this process in the film, and I hope you will see it.
Great. Well, let's watch the last clip and have a brief
Okay.
conversation about that, and then we'll all get to watch the film together.
Okay.
That's a thing I was writing about where I said that it's just if we didn't connect with, well, using a term that Marion gave me, with members of our tribe, that we would end up on water tanks shooting at these shapes.
Right.
That's the thing that I was talking about, that there's different tribes that represent different structures, that there's a tribe, the illusory tribe, or this illusion of a big tribe that's called America. And really it isn't a tribe, it's really thousands of different tribes, and that one member of a tribe can get separated from the members on the opposite coast, and that person, if they don't connect with somebody at some point, they'll end up climbing the water tank and shooting. And that the member of the tribe that's separated hears this internal war, because they're at war with everything they're surrounded by, only they can't physically enact a war because they don't have the proper weapons or whatever, or they haven't reached the point where they can accept their own death by reacting. And just the volume of that, what that is for that person, which I guess I was really talking about myself in alienation, the volume of that sound reverberating inside their head that nobody else can hear.
But in a way, for you, making art is like a certain way of not going on top of the tower and shooting all over the place.
Exactly, or it's to identify the impulse to do that, and give it form so that I don't end up going up the tower. It's I give it a different form.
Well, that's what I was alluding to earlier. In America, politics is in the impulse to go on the tower. It always comes up in some sort of a very idiosyncratic or very crazy voice. In Europe, it's always covered up by politics and takes a lot of meaning. But here, you have to reinvent, what politics is with that impulse. And I think that's what you're doing. I mean, still to go on with this idea of abstraction, politics, and concept, and they don't, they connect somewhere. They don't have to speak the same language. I guess I have to do.
Okay.
The idea of this million of tribes is, it's very strange when you think of it, that this is a concept that Deleuze developed, the idea of multiplicity. And he says, well, you don't deal with any sort of phenomenon without seeing the multiplicity of it. You don't start with one tree or with one tree that's called David. You have to create a multiplicity for it, right? And that's where we took this. This is made of a series of voices who try to connect to what David is, but it is not a way of elevating David, but putting them on a level where we can understand how life works. Yeah. Right? And this idea of multiplicity is cardinal for Deleuze. And then that's one of the elements that I found again and again. In my life, when I open a newspaper, sometimes I read Virilio, sometimes I read Baudrillard, sometimes I read Deleuze and Guattari. It is the same thing. It is the same thing. I mean, of course, I'm not trying to assimilate them, but you have to start with a weapon that is multiplicity. That's why constantly what I do is not individual. And this is not a book on David Wojnarowicz, but a book on the environment of David. And David said it himself. He said, if you don't bring in the environment, then you cannot have a memory. You can't have a biography, and in a sense, I was being David Wojnarowicz when I brought this up. My whole approach to culture is to multiply it, and then to try to understand it. You have to scatter it, And the book doesn't even have an introduction. Right. Nothing to guide, like in a Hollywood movie, where people were told in advance what they do. People, they know already what they're looking for, but they don't know that they are looking. And something like that is very important. That's why all these tribes have to be identified for what they are. And none of them has to be superior to the other or repressive of the other. We just have to learn how to connect a tribe with another. White, black, Chinese, And even in the art world, when David was in the art world, he wasn't. He was between the East Village painters and the more artists born, trained, like Hickey Smith. Hickey Smith would be with Collab, right? And the others would be the East Village painters, but they're not the same thing. They're side by side, but sometimes David went from one to the other, but he never went completely away from it. That's why there's elements of the East Village in David's work, and that's why it was very special. You were asking me why did he get interested in David? Well, Marion fell on David by mistake, right? And I fell on David by mistake too, because I realized when I saw him finally that I found someone like Jack Smith or like all these people who've been thinking, not just being communicated to, because the communication has a problem. Right? In communication, you flatten out everything. Right? So you have to turn communication into something else, into a creation, and that's why I was thinking regarding the ACT UP. The example I was taking of the Italian town, and they suddenly they're choosing not to riot and not to use some more violent means, but to realize that you have to use your intelligence. The advertisers, that all the gay people, who were involved in ACT UP, they were feeding information, but it's not enough. You don't feed the information; you have to become the information. And David does that. He does that because not just because he gets into a rage or because he gets into a rage, but by being what it is, he participates in it, and he allows the possibility to clarify what it is to be on the verge of death. What kind of insight does it bring to society? And of course, it was not very well received for the most part. But I was struck. I mean, I was really dumbstruck. For years, I tried to understand what America was by going to the morgue and things like that. Right? But in fact, I was so surprised that a tribe of America took on, acted up. Right? And I hadn't expected it because I thought, Americans are all kind of media washed down, right? But this showed that if a tribe is threatened, then the tribe had to learn other languages. And they have to choose, because they are threatened with instant death, they have to choose to life.
Yeah. Before taking a few questions, I wanted to ask Marion, for me, one of the most important ideas that Wojnarowicz put out into the world, and there are many, but that idea of the one tribe nation and puncturing it. And speaking of multiplicity, borrowing that tribe idea from you, from a conversation. Do you remember where that came from, and what context that idea of tribe or even that word came out?
For me, it came, of course, there was Deleuze and Felix, but before that, because I'm a photographer and a filmmaker, I used to go to the Cinémathèque in Paris, and they were showing a film of Gérard Depardieu. Is it Gérard? Gérard Depardieu, the photographer. And Raymond, yes, not Gérard Depardieu. No, it's
That was another film.
so it's Raymond Depardieu, and he was showing a documentary that was censored in France, so they just show it at La Cinémathèque. And he was there with Jean Rouch, and he was telling this story that, you know, after doing this film that was censored, he didn't know what to do. You know, he was a photographer but attracted to make films, and so Jean Rouch said to him, "Well, just film your tribe." And then Depardieu said, "Well, what is my tribe?" And he started thinking about what is my tribe, and he said, "Oh, of course, my tribe is the photographers I work with every day in the same agency." And he made a movie about them. And it's a great, great movie of a photographer filming other photographers from his tribe. And then something came from me that was really sharp, you know, like, yes, you have to find your tribe. And I remember also one day François had a conversation with Nan Goldin after she had like a breakdown, you know, after drugs, etc. And she said, I don't know what, you know, what could I do now? And François said the same thing to her, you know, just keep on photographing your tribe. You have doing that. And it's true, the idea of tribe, like when I travel, whenever I go, I understood that I always would meet people that I feel close to them. Yeah. And this is your tribe, you know, it's when you feel comfortable, when you see somebody in the street and you know somewhere that is from your tribe, you know, like, you know, having kind of same thoughts, same desire of living, same desire of killing, same desire of revolt, you know. For me, that's a tribe.
I think that's a perfect way to end this portion of the conversation. So thank you very much, Marion, Sylvère. Unfortunately, because I think that we're all eager to... Okay. I'm being fed with information that I'll deliver back to everyone. Thank you, Megan. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll have the beginning of the film in 10 minutes. 4:30. Thank you.